So I'm in Singapore. One of the things that you notice when you come here is how well organized everything is. And part of that is just not only the foresight of the politicians, but the fact that they were forced to engage in advanced city planning because of how small Singapore is in terms of geography. People say that you can drive across the entire island within an hour or two if you were able to drive in a straight line. So that's how small the place is. But one of the things you notice is that despite the safety, despite the convenience, the country is having problems with demographics. You're having problems with just sort of creating or taking advantage of all the just benefits that the political class has created. This should be, if you look at it, beautiful homes that are essentially affordable to most citizens, depending on their age and marital status and whether or not they have children. But there's something missing here, and you just noticed behind me, when I started the video, a bus. Well, that bus looks not Singaporean, it looks British. That has been imported, that design has been imported into the country. Not surprising, given the country's history as a former British colony. But then you look at the fact that you've got, on the one hand, convenience, right? You can just walk over within a couple of minutes of living anywhere within probably a 5 to 10 minute radius, and just walk over, and you've got, a coffee shop, you've got a ice cream bingsu shop, you have a Subway, a 7-Eleven. Now, none of these things, if you think about it though, are Singaporean, or they're not uniquely Singaporean. So that over there is, if you can't see it, but it says Thai. It's advertising mangoes, and Thailand has the best marketing when it comes to mangoes. You've got Subway, which is, as far as I know, American. 7-Eleven, which, traveling in Asia, the quality ranges so much. I don't know if it's Japanese anymore or it's still American, but certainly it's not uniquely Singaporean. Let's just walk over here. So there's this image of Singapore as a glittering sort of, city-state. And it's true that you don't see, homeless people, for example, to the same level or to any level that you see in San Francisco. But again, it doesn't necessarily mean that the convenience and the city planning has been successful across the board or in a 360 angle way. So again, just look how convenient this is. You talk about childcare, you talk about children's education. For the most part, if you're a Singaporean citizen and you live in one of these apartments, otherwise known as HDB flats, you can just walk over to childcare, to a clinic, a medical clinic upstairs. You can just walk over anywhere for the most part. That's a preschool up there. A library. All the new malls, as far as I know, are required to have allocate space to make sure that there's a library. But again, what do you see here that is uniquely Singaporean? And you see that actually matters. If you're trying to create a society, the planning doesn't show up on any economics database, but it does matter. And that's something that, you talk about, what do you call that? You can call it the X factor. You've got a clinic over here, looks like eyesight. You have a pet shop over there, and you have Chinese medicine, which I suppose is somewhat unique, behind me. But you can see again, once you move away from Orchard, the famous street in Singapore that has a lot of, fancy high-end shops, and obviously a lot of tourists, you've got an issue in terms of what is it that really makes up the Singaporean dream, or what really constitutes what it means to be Singaporean. And that's why in this country, the political class, otherwise known as the PAP, People's Action Party, the party of LKY, that's why it's so important, because if you're going around and none of these shops are uniquely Singaporean, and in fact you're actually importing retail stores to the point where nothing you see is uniquely Singaporean, just based on size or whatnot, it forces a lot of these rich countries to either take minority stakes, partnership stakes overseas, and then import those countries' retail expertise or cooking expertise into their own country. And that's the benefit of empire. The benefit of empire is that you show up and you don't have 100% domestic retail or any sort of 100% saturation or concentration. You get to have the privilege of having an American shop, a Thai mango, shop, and so on and so forth. But again, it does have a subjective impact. And I don't think any economist or even any sociologist has necessarily combined these issues together. Namely, what happens when you're too successful, when you're too good at planning? What are the consequences of being really, really good at city planning, but then relying on your political class, or let's say in the case of the United States, the corporate class, from dominating the culture, the everyday culture? And this is, again, something new because we have had concentration of power, we've had monopolies, but we've had politicians be able to break up some of those monopolies. But now, whether it's coffee, oil, maybe not oil, whether it's coffee or, just almost anything, technology certainly, you're not dealing with a lot of vendors. And, so what you see now are politicians unable to break up monopolies anywhere in the world. And so what they're doing is they're resorting to what I call de facto bribes, right? You get a subsidy, you get a check. Maybe we'll subsidize the store so they can have a nice sale, half off, 35% off, and I love these things, right? Everyone does. Who doesn't like a sale? But again, the problem is that overall, the real fundamental problem, or perhaps the real fundamental issue affecting most countries, is what does it mean to be American, British, Singaporean? And the answer has to be not necessarily only the corporate class or the political class. It has to be, or the technology companies. It has to be the artists, has to be the movie makers, has to be the authors. And that is something that certainly Singapore is having problems in terms of not only domestic consumption, but also export. You talk about crazy rich Asians. Well, the guy who wrote that, I think, as far as I know, he relocated to the United States. And so, again, you get to, once you open your borders to a 7-Eleven or a Subway, you're also, threatened by having a brain drain the other way. So the country that is exporting to you also gets to take away. So the question is whether or not, in the end, there is a good, sort of relationship, good reciprocity that fundamentally makes everyone better. And again, the question is, how do you do that if you're a small country like Singapore, where for the most part you're importing almost everything you own or everything you have, despite the fact that you have a lot of money, and that you probably should be able to create, quote unquote, a Singaporean brand outside of the wonderful politicians that they have here. Look at the app, Grab. There's a famous app, but again, it's being eclipsed by, in terms of quality, that's a subjective term. I have to be careful when I talk in Singapore because the defamation laws are quite broad. So Grab, in my opinion, is not at the same quality level or consistency level as a Gojek, or if you go to Thailand, in terms of the pricing, a benefit for the consumer, it's not as good as Bolt. And so you're dealing with these technology companies that are, quote unquote, homegrown, but, they rely perhaps on GPS. I don't know how many satellites Singapore has, and so on and so forth. So the whole world is becoming more and more linked, and it's becoming harder for any one sector of society, whether it's the political class or the corporate class, or even the artists and the musicians, becoming very, very difficult for them to sort of hold everything together and create a cohesive identity. So what you see in the West, especially, is you have problems with creating a cohesive identity. That, again, is something you should be able to understand better, having just taken a quick walk in a Singaporean neighborhood with me.